Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. This one will be the official raid guide for DPS Warlocks in Phase 2 of Season of Discovery. In this video, I'll cover everything you need to know about raiding as a DPS Warlock in Phase 2. I'll go over what consumables to use, the best demons, your stat priority, the best talent builds and runes, a quick look at Pre BiS and Phase 2 BiS. Then we'll go over your rotation for a single target and AoE, and then we'll end with some Addons and Weakauras to maximize your damage. If you're looking for the tank one, that'll come next and in a couple days. I'll post a parsing guide for those looking to do even more damage as a Warlock after that. A note before we begin, Blizzard is buffing and nerfing stuff all the time with other classes. Thankfully, they left us alone for the most part, but we never know if something will change. That being said, if anything changes with the information in this video, I will immediately update you guys. Now this will be a longer video, so please feel free to use the timestamps to navigate to whatever part of the video that you want. Now before we start, if you would please hit that follow button so you can see when I post my next Warlock video, and feel free to check out the stream over at twitch.tv/CrixVibes, where I play multiple Warlocks in the guild Fake Fresh, where you can find me parsing, speedrunning, and also just playing a lot of other classes as well as new games when they come out. Lastly, make sure to check out the Warlock Discord, your one-stop shop for everything and anything Warlock related. A link will be in the description. Alright, let's get to the video. First, let's look at how Warlocks are doing. Warlocks are and have been in an amazing spot since the launch of Phase 2. We've been top 3 for the entire phase thus far, and we seem to get better as we get more gear. This is obviously subject to change, as when other classes get gear, this can move around. But so far this phase is treating us pretty well right now, in large part to some of our talents in the destruction tree, as well as our very powerful runes. Let's just hope that Blizzard leaves us alone and we can continue to avoid the nerf bat that's been going around. So to start this guide, the first thing I want to talk about is arguably one of the most important things when it comes to raiding as a Warlock, or raiding in general, and that's consumables. There are many types of consumables in the game. Some that give us a decent amount of spell power, which makes you deal more damage. Some are more defensive, giving you more stamina or making you tankier, and then some are simple ones that simply give you more health and mana. And there's even a couple consumables that are locked behind professions that'll boost your DPS even higher. But the most important thing that you can get before raid is actually not a consumable, but a world buff called Spark of Inspiration. This buff is massive and gives you 4% crit and 42 spell damage. It gets dropped frequently in Orgrimmar for Horde and Ironforge for Alliance, and is really easy to obtain as they seem to be dropping every few minutes during the day. The buff originally comes from turning in a quest that you get from the last boss in the Noma raid, and once you get it, you can boon it with the Chrono Boon Displacer and then unboon it when you're ready to use it in the raid. Other consumables that you can get to boost your damage are Lesser Wizard Oil, which once you put on your weapon will give you 16 spell damage for 30 minutes. Both Lesser Arcane Elixir, which gives you 14 spell damage, and Elixir of Firepower, which gives you 10 fire damage, are a must as well. You have a plethora of elixirs and items that'll make you tankier or give you more health, both of which are important in this phase because we have a little bit lower stamina than normal thanks to some of the gear we have. Some just doesn't have gear on it, and we even have a tier set, which I'll get into later, that makes us lose stamina, which, like I said, I'll touch on the video later when we talk about our best in slot gear. Elixir of Defense will give you some more armor, which results in physical damage reduction, and Elixir of Fortitude will give you some more health. Rumsey Rum Black Label will also give you some stamina, which is health, and Mighty Troll's Blood will give 12 health per 5 seconds, which might not sound like a lot, but it adds up. You also have a ton of options for food to eat as well that will provide you with a food buff. You have Sagefish Delight, which once eaten will give you 6 mana every 5 seconds, and if you feel like you want some more health, there's a handful of food buffs that once eaten will give you 12 stamina and 12 spirit. Note that you can only have one food buff at a time though, so choose wisely. Health and mana potions both are very helpful and are pretty cheap in this phase. I use a mana potion almost every single fight, as this will give you a large chunk of your mana back, which means you don't have to be life tapping as often, meaning you won't have to stop casting your damaging spells to life tap, leading you to do more damage to the boss. Plus, if you're not life tapping, then you won't be losing as much health as well. Health potions can save your life, literally. There's been many times that I've almost died and quickly popped a health potion to not die. It's always ideal to keep a stack on you and on a comfortable keybind for emergencies. And while we're on the topic, Hellstones are massive in this phase. I've done a lot of Warlock log reviews where they're dying and they're not using Hellstones. They're massive, they heal for a good amount of health, and the best part is they're free to use. Well, they cost a soul shard, but it's always worth to keep one on you at all times, because just like health potions, this can save your life. And while you're at it, make sure your tanks have a Hellstone as well. This is more niche, but free action potions, nature protection potions, and fire protection potions have some uses in the raid that can help negate some damage. This is not mandatory by any means, but can definitely help you out in the raid some. Lastly, there are 2 new items that buff you as well. However, they're locked behind professions. Enchanters can craft and use the Enchanted Sigil Innovation, which when used buffs you for 30 minutes, giving you 20 spell damage. Alchemists can craft and use the Mildly Irradiated Potion, which when used gives you some health and mana back, but most importantly increases all damage done by spells by 35 for 20 seconds. Both of these are nice, and I'll touch more on professions in the professions section. Well, that's it for consumables. Next up, I want to talk about another important topic, stat priority. And our stat priority is as followed: spell hit, and then spell power, crit chance, intellect, stamina, and then spirit. Spell hit is the most important stat for Warlocks. If you can't hit the target, then you won't do damage. You need 5% hit to be hit capped in this phase, and it's a little bit harder to reach than last phase since we no longer get the hit that came with Black Fathom Mana Oil or the boon of Black Fathom. Affliction does have a talent called Suppression, however that only affects affliction spells, and as you'll learn later in the talent section, Affliction is very underwhelming in this phase. Luckily, you'll be able to grab some hit rating off the new gear in the raid. Spell power is important because it makes you deal more damage. Pretty simple there. This can come in the form of spell damage, shadow damage, and fire damage. Crit chance is nice because it gives you a higher chance of critting, meaning you'll do more damage, and thanks to one of your talents in the destruction tree, Ruin, we do even more damage when we crit. Intellect gives you more mana and increases your chance to crit. It's not the biggest stat because we have life tap for mana, but still, extra mana is nice and we do love the crit. Stamina is nice as each point of stamina gives you 10 max health points. Having a health pool high enough not to die to raid mechanics is very important, but you should naturally acquire this from gear without needing to really worry about it too much. Like I said earlier, we are a little bit lower on stamina in this phase due to some of our gear lacking in stamina, and a few pieces actually have negative stamina on it, which is why I suggested the consumes we talked about to make you tankier and give you some more stamina. Spirit increases your out of combat health and mana regeneration. Spirit is not that important since we also have life tap. Next up, I wanted to quickly talk about demons. It's an eternal debate on whether or not to use the imp or the succubus, as they both deal the most amount of damage out of the 4 demons. As a DPS Warlock, you'll pretty much never use Voidwalker, and while you can get some good use out of the utility of a Fell Hunter, it does less damage than the imp and the succubus. As for the imp and the succubus, right now the imp does a decent amount more than the succubus. This is thanks to a couple talents that you can take to boost your imp's damage, as well as a rune called Lake of Fire that buffs your imp's fire damage as well as your own. But also, some of the bosses have extraordinarily high armor, making your succubus deal less damage since all her damage is melee damage. So it's suggested to use the imp. This also has the bonus of giving you a little bit more spell power from your demonic knowledge rune, as well as provides stamina to your party members via Blood Pact. Depending on your kill times, your imp can run out of mana, but it's still worth using the imp. If you're an imp hater and you really just prefer the succubus, that's okay. You can just move your points around and use it if you like. Just know that you're missing out on some solid damage by doing so. Next up, I want to talk about one important factor to Warlocks and one of the main reasons you're in the raid, and that's curses. Warlocks have a handful of curses that they can use to deal damage, or debuff the boss, which in turn buffs the raid's damage. The main 2 curses are Curse of Recklessness, which increases the target's attack power, but most importantly, reduces its armor by 290 for 2 minutes. This makes all your physical damage dealers in your raid deal more damage, and that's pretty important. The other one is Curse of the Elements, which lowers the fire and frost resistances of the target by 45, but most importantly, increases all the fire and frost damage the target takes by 6%. This makes all of your casters that deal fire and frost damage do more damage, obviously. Which one of these 2 curses you will use depends largely on your raid. Typically, if you have more physical DPS, you'll use Curse of Recklessness, and if you have more casters, you'll use Curse of the Elements. However, in this phase, a new weapon was introduced that makes it so whenever they melee a mob, it'll make the target take 6% increased magical damage. So it's pretty much Curse of Elements, except for it's all magic, instead of just fire and frost like Curse of Elements, and also this does not stack with Curse of Elements. This weapon is best in slot for many physical damage dealers, so you don't need to worry about putting up Curse of Elements once one of these drops in your raid, making Curse of Rec the main pick for curses and to be used on all fights. And I go so far to put this up on trash packs on the elites when I'm running around if they'll last a long time. As for Curse of Agony, it's more DPS to use Curse of Elements over Agony, even for just yourself. And as I just mentioned, you'll want Curse of Recklessness for the boss. If you have 2 Warlocks in your raid and one of your physical DPS dealers has the fist weapon we just talked about, then one of the other Warlocks can Agony so long as the other Warlock is putting up Curse of Rec. Okay, so time to talk about the talents. I'm only going to talk about Fire Destruction as it's miles ahead of both Demonology and Affliction. If you're looking for an Affliction tree, let me know in the comments and I'll link you one. But seeing as Fire Destro is king right now, I'll just talk about Destruction and some variations of it. As of right now, this is the highest simming spec and what a lot of us top locks in the world are using right now. But obviously things can change in the future. You have some minor options if you prefer not to put this point into Improved Imp and put it into Improved Immolate. And to counter that, you can also take 2 points out of Emberstorm to top off your Improved Imp. However, I would just use this spec because while Imp still does great damage, you might find him running out of mana on some longer fights, especially if your kill times are slower. You've got 2 options for your first 5 points. Typically I put them in Cataclysm, which doesn't give too much mana back, but I used to not cast any Shadow Bolts, so it made sense to take it. However, recently I've been turned on to actually using Shadow Bolt Volley in Raid, as there's many trash packs with 5 or less mobs, and Shadow Bolt Volley does more damage than Hellfire with that many targets. Not only that, but on the second to last boss, Mechanical Menagerie, the meta right now is to actually use Shadow Bolt Volley if your raid uses a strat that stacks the 3 bosses up, which many people do. So for both of those reasons, you can put your first 5 points into improved Shadow Bolt if you'd like. I'll leave that one completely up to you though. Your next 5 points go into Bane for faster casting times on your Immolate, and Shadow Bolts for when you Shadow Bolt volley if you choose to do so. 5 into Devastation for some crit, 1 for Shadow Burn for a finisher or when you're moving. Also, I love Shadow Burn on the last boss as it one-shots the bombs that come out, so it allows you to help your raid out a little bit. The 2 points in the Destructive Reach are completely flex points, and you can put them into Intensity if you want. I personally prefer Destructive Reach right now, to be honest, since we run mages and they will 100% have the aggro over me. So I don't get much pushback on my Hellfire. However, this is subjective and you can definitely put those points into Intensity if you want. Your point in Ruin is mandatory and it's super overpowered right now. This is making our crits do ridiculous amounts of damage. My Chaos Bolts right now are critting for like 4,500 and I'm not even remotely close to even Pre BiS. Put 5 points into Emberstorm to give you more fire damage and 4 points into Improved Immolate. Then your last point into Improved Imp like we talked about. As for runes, you obviously need Chaos Bolt, Shadow and Flame, and Incinerate. There's no contest there, so I'm not going to talk about them much. For your boot rune, Demonic Knowledge is the best of the group. I'm getting like 70 or so spell power from this rune when I pair it with the best in slot STV Blood Moon Trinket, Infernal Pact Essence, and when my imp is buffed up. So just use them and keep it on. Dance of the Wicked was bugged on launch until about last week and it was giving back an insane amount of mana, but it's been fixed now and it's back to how it should be, so I'll never use this as a DPS Warlock again. The only rune that I'd swap off is Lake of Fire, and that's only on the last 2 bosses possibly. Menagerie has a ton of movement and is just annoying to use in my opinion, and if you're going to use Shadow Bolt Volley, then Demonic Tactics makes even more sense. The last boss, you can make an argument for Demonic Tactics as well, however, I personally don't, and I still use Lake of Fire on the last boss, and just use the intermission downtime to tap to full, and then get a full bandage off if I don't get healed up. This of course can be scuffed if you get the Fire Dot debuff or something that stops you from being able to tap, so I'll leave that up to you. Bottom line is, if you can use Lake of Fire, then you should use Lake of Fire because it is better than Demonic Tactics. Alright, next I want to touch very quickly on Pre BiS and BiS for Phase 2. I won't go too much into detail because I already posted a super in-depth video on Pre BiS and Phase 2 BiS, and I'll link them in the corner of the screen right now. But to briefly touch on it, your Pre BiS is a mix of new PvP gear, a couple pieces from BFD, and a ton of buy now and equip items that you can purchase off the auction house. I'll link this in the description so you can see it for yourself, but if you hold your mouse over each slot, it'll show you a ton of options ranging from expensive to pretty cheap. For example, this Pre BiS robe is pretty expensive, but you have a ton of options here that are much cheaper. Like I said, I go heavily into detail in the Pre BiS video and I urge you to check it out. As for your Phase 2 BiS, this is what it looks like. Once again, I won't go into detail, just check out the in-depth Phase 2 BiS video that I made, which has much more information about the BiS and the options, but it's pretty much a mix of loot from the new Noma raid, some loot from the new Blood Moon STV event, and a couple crafted items. However, some quick notes on this without going too far into detail right now is out of the 2 options of tier sets in this raid, the Irradiated set is better than the Hyperconductive set due to the stats, spell power, and the set bonus. You do lose 35 stamina with the set, which is why I was suggesting they use tanky consumes earlier, as well as consumables that give you some stamina. Next up is the professions, and for once we have multiple options for professions and they each bring something solid to the table. First off, tailoring is by far the best pick for your profession and it's no contest. Being a tailor allows you to craft and use the super powerful neuro-linked Arcano Filament Monocle. This helm comes with a ton of stats, 22 spell damage, and a strong on-use ability that gives you a whopping 50 spell damage for 12 seconds on a 10-minute cooldown. This is currently the best helm in the game, and you'll be wanting to get this as soon as you can. So tailoring is a must. Now, for your second profession, you have 3 choices, and they're all pretty good. I personally will always choose engineering purely for the explosives with solid dynamite and the fact that it's mandatory in my guild. They help a ton on trash packs, and it's also free damage on the boss. Very easy to just throw one while moving or whenever you want. I know that there's easy throw dynamite in the game, however those can backfire in your own hand and blow up, and I do not want that to happen. As for enchanting, this is arguably the best second pick in terms of pure DPS. You'll be able to craft and use the sigil, which gives you a passive 20 spell damage buff full time. Lastly, alchemy allows you to craft and use a mildly irradiated potion, which gives you 35 spell damage for 20 seconds and is pretty strong on really short fights. All in all, the second pick is up to you. Although I'd say engineering if you like your explosives and enchanting if you want that passive 20 spell damage. Next up, we'll go over the single target rotation and the AoE rotation. Starting with the single target rotation, it's pretty simple. You keep a Lake of Fire down, you keep Immolate on the boss at all times, you keep Chaos Bolt on cooldown, and you fill with Incinerate while you wait for the stuff to come off cooldown or to put Immolate back up. But let's go over it from the beginning. To start, you're going to precast Incinerate. You want Incinerate to land on the boss right when the pulse timer hits 0 and the boss is pulled. Then immediately put your curse up. Refer to the curse section for a breakdown, but I always curse of recklessness. Then cast Rain of Fire. Now, one thing about this is to use rank 1 Rain of Fire instead of max rank. This will drastically help you save a ton of mana, because we're only using Rain of Fire to put the lake down and then we're canceling. So there's no point in wasting the mana on the rank 2. And to piggyback off that, just in case you didn't know, whenever you cast Rain of Fire, you don't need to wait for the entire channel to put down a lake. The Lake of Fire gets put down the second you cast Rain of Fire, meaning it's much more DPS to just stop your cast once the lake is down rather than channel that entire Rain of Fire. I do this by simply pressing whatever my next ability is that I want to press. In this example, let's say Chaos Bolt. So I'd press Rain of Fire, and then the second my finger leaves the Rain of Fire keybind, I'm immediately spamming my Chaos Bolt button. Another good time to do this is when a mechanic is about to hit you. You can just Rain of Fire real quick and then move from the mechanic, so you're ready to start blasting when you plant your feet again. Okay, so after you put your Lake of Fire down, pop your cooldowns. This will be your tailoring helmet, your alchemy potion, etc. And then immediately cast Chaos Bolt. You will then be looking to keep Chaos Bolt on cooldown as much as you can, but also make sure that your Lake of Fire is always down before casting Chaos Bolt. After that, put up Immolate and keep this up on the boss as much as you can, but make sure you do not clip it, unless you're running the Invocation rune, which you shouldn't be because Shadow and Flame is much better. Clipping simply means that you reapplied the dot before the dot expired, so always make sure that last tick of Immolate goes off before you put another Immolate up. Shadowburn is a very nice finisher when you won't be able to get a full cast of a spell off. You can get one of these off almost every fight. This is also a really nice spell to use if you're forced to move from a boss mechanic or during trash packs, assuming you don't need a life tap for some mana back. Speaking of mana, use your mana potion as soon as you can to get it on cooldown. Life tap is needed, but it's usually safe to life tap when you have to move for mechanics. I also like to throw in a solid dynamite during the boss fight as well, typically when I need to move. But if I don't need to move, I just throw it in after my opener. Now, as for your AoE rotation, you have two ways to AoE, Shadowbolt Volley and Hellfire. While I prefer Shadowbolt Volley when it's 5 or less targets, and I use Hellfire for the big trash packs. I keep an extra pair of gloves and robes on me so I can have Shadowbolt Volley and Demonic Tactics on those backup pair. And then I keep them on keybinds so I can easily swap to and from the runes depending on the trash packs. Shadowbolt Volley is rather simple. You spam Shadowbolts. Sometimes I'll put up a couple Curse of Elements while the tank is gathering, or I'm waiting for a little bit of threat before I start spamming Shadowbolt Volleys, but a lot of the trash dies so fast that it doesn't matter. Just spam Shadowbolt. For Hellfire, I like to get my Incinerate buff up if I can, then I drop a Lake of Fire and then I run into melee and I start Hellfiring. No matter which tactic for AoE you choose to use, make sure to throw a solid dynamite in at some point if you're engineering. Lastly, I wanted to quickly go over some add-ons and Weakauras. If you saw any add-on or Weakaura during this video that you liked, I made a very brief video going over every single one of my add-ons and my Weakauras in the description of that video. I will link that video now on screen as well as post it in the description of this video. But to keep it simple here without going into detail about all my add-ons, I use LVI and Weakauras, which is the most important ones. And speaking of important, this Weakaura is the most important one that you could have. This will keep track of all your cooldowns, your dot timers, and pretty much anything else that you could possibly need. This exact one that I'm using is Foji's, which costs like $5 to get all his Weakauras, including his Nomer raid Weakauras and any future ones. But if you want to save some money, I'll link a dope Warlock Weakaura right under this one in the description. Well, that's it for this one, guys. That should be everything you need to know to be able to pump in phase 2. In a couple of days, I'll post a DPS parse guide or like a VOD and go over my entire VOD of what I'm doing per boss. I don't know which one you guys want. But if you have any other ideas for videos, let me know in the comments. Also, let me know if I missed anything. We're all here to help each other out. As always, check out the Warlock Discord and please hit the follow button and peep the stream to catch me live playing this game, and just feel free to stop by and ask any questions. You can also join my Discord and ask anything, or just to hang out and meet some like-minded people. I'll put a link to all that in the description. Until next time, good luck out there and happy pumping.